Welcome back to Needle Me This. This podcast usually lives in the chat two chair, real conversations with real people, and something permanent is being built. Most episodes happen mid-session, unscripted, where people tend to talk a little more honestly than they do anywhere else. Up to this point, this podcast has been about client stories, identity transition, and the moments that lead people to get tattooed. What I've started to notice, though, is that the same themes keep showing up over and over again. Control, meaning, change, and how people rebuild themselves through different chapters of life. So this episode is a little bit different. No guest this week, just me. I wanted to take a step back, connect some of the dots, and talk where this podcast is heading, why Japanese art has become such a big part of that direction, set the stage for what's coming next, including Savannah Ghost Expo and the next episode with Nick Bones, who is a tattoo artist over in Las Vegas, who I'm sharing a booth with. Same podcast, same honesty, just a wider lens. I really didn't plan this podcast to be philosophical, but the chair keeps making it that way. People definitely talk differently when they're getting tattooed. I've noticed that between the three parts, sometimes when I ask the more philosophical questions during the tattooed part 2, it gives you a reason to get out of the pain, and it gets you to really think about what's going on in your life and where your life is headed to. And I think it's important to reflect on these moments quite a bit. I'm constantly reflecting on myself and where I'm at in my life and where I want to go, and making sure that all my decisions and choices moving forward are pushing towards that goal. A lot of people have told me that I ask pretty intensive questions sometimes, and I don't really give any warnings beforehand, especially during the part 2. Like I said, when you're getting tattooed, it kind of gives you out of that focus of this hurts, how this hurts, and it gets you more focused on answering the question, obviously. A lot of clients have told me that they almost enjoyed it more being able to have something get them out of their mind and not being stuck in just looking at your phone or listening to music, because sometimes that's also too much. So it's doing a podcast in the middle of doing a tattoo is actually enhancing people's experience, which is a really cool part. People are genuinely revealing where they are in their life without even trying, and allowing their true authentic self to really shine through. One of my favorite parts about tattooing and running a tattoo business is the connections that I get. Most of my friends have been clients before, and a lot of them, that's where it started. Take Caitlin's episodes. On paper, it's all about tattoos, motherhood, and nursing. But what really came out in that conversation was identity loss and reclamation. She wasn't just talking about being a mom or a nurse. She was talking about how those roles slowly took over her entire sense of self. The gym wasn't about fitness. The tattoos weren't about aesthetics. They were about getting pieces of herself back after years of putting everyone else first. Then there was the first episode with Dante. The one lives in this tension between control and surrender. He came in with clear ideas, strong opinions, and a lot of curiosity, and a lot of certainty, and then immediately started questioning everything once the tattoo process actually began. That's the moment where he talks about hating the experience while it's happening, but loving it the second that it's over. The back and forth shows up constantly in tattooing, and people want control, but the meaning usually shows up right after they let it go. And in the episode with Teresa, who works in youth mental health, the conversation naturally drifted into emotional regulation, burnout, and boundaries. What struck me there wasn't anything dramatic. It was how much her job mirrors the tattoo process. You can't rush it. You can't fix someone. You can only create a safe container and trust the process. That's the true in therapy, and it's true in tattooing. Even in episodes where grief or loss is part of the story, like memorial tattoos, the focus isn't actually on the pain itself. It's on what comes after. Tattoos in these episodes aren't closures, they're anchors, they're marks of transitions, not endings. What all of these conversations have shown me is that people rarely come in for tattoos when life's calm. They come in when something is shifting, when they're rebuilding, refining, or trying to regain a sense of authority over their own body and story. That's the thread I didn't plan for, but I can't ignore it. One thing that keeps coming up across these episodes is control, or more specifically, where people think control lives versus where it actually does. In almost every session so far, someone walks in believing the meaning of their tattoo needs to be locked in before the needle ever even touches their skin. They want certainty up front. They want to know exactly what it means, exactly how it'll feel, exactly how they'll relate to it in 10 years from now. That's not how it ever actually works. What I keep watching happen is that meaning shows up after the experience, not before it. The tattoo doesn't resolve something. It gives people a reference point, something to return to later when life shifts again. Conclusions, they're not markers. They sit in the middle of a story, not at the end of it. The idea has shown up whether the conversation was about motherhood, burnout, grief, or rebuilding confidence. People aren't chasing permanence. They're trying to anchor themselves during movement. And that's honestly why I keep getting pulled deeper into Japanese tattooing. Not because it's trendy or not because it looks cool, but because it understands the exact relationship between meaning and time. Japanese art doesn't demand an explanation. It doesn't rush clarity. It uses symbolism that's meant to be lived with. Seasons, animals, forces of nature, transformation, and permanence. You're not meant to get it all at once. The meaning unfolds as you change. When someone chooses a dragon, a chrysanthemum, a wave, or a mask, they're not freezing a moment. They're choosing a language that can adapt with them. The imagery doesn't collapse when your life changes, it expands. That's very different from hyper-literal tattoos that only make sense at one point in your life. Those tend to age emotionally faster, not because they're bad tattoos, but because they don't have room for growth. Japanese composition does the opposite. I think another reason Japanese art fits this podcast so well is that it mirrors the tattoo process itself. It rewards patience, it punishes rushing, asks for trust instead of micromanagement. That's the same thing that shows up in the chair. The more someone tries to control every second of the tattoo, the harder the experience usually is. And the moment that they let go, even just a little, things settle. The body settles, the conversation settles, and the tattoo settles. That's not a coincidence. Tattooing teaches the same lesson over and over again, and you can participate in the process without dominating it. And that brings me to what's next for the podcast. This reflection episode is about philosophy, about patterns, meaning, and why the chair reveals so much. The next episode is about practice. Next week, I'll be at Savannah Ghost Expo sitting down with Nick Bones. That conversation isn't just about tattoos or styles. It's about lineage, respect for the craft, and what it means to push tattooing forward without forgetting where it comes from. If this episode is about understanding why these stories matter, the next one is about seeing how the philosophy gets lived out by someone who's been doing it at a high level for a long time. Different setting, same questions. One thing I want to sit with for a minute, especially leading into a conversation with someone like Nick, is this tension between tradition and evolution. Tattooing right now is loud. Everyone's chasing a new style, a new look, a new algorithm-friendly version of the craft. When I look at Japanese tattooing, what stands out isn't how old it is. It's how it evolved without losing its spine. The symbols stayed, the rules stayed, the respect stayed, and the only thing that changed was the expression. That's rare. Like something you either worship blindly or throw away completely. Japanese tattooing lives in the middle. It says, learn the rules deeply enough that you can bend them without breaking the language. Conventions like the Savannah Ghost Expo are interesting because they strip everything back. No curated Instagram feed, no perfect lighting, and no second takes. You're standing next to artists who've been doing this longer than you've been alive, and you either hold up or you don't. That environment forces humility. That's why I like them. They remind you that tattooing didn't come from content creation. It came from repetition, discipline, and long hours doing the same things over and over and over again until you get better. The Ghost Expo in particular attracts people who care about lineage. You can feel it in the room. People aren't there to chase trends. They're there to sharpen their edge. I've been thinking a lot less about what I want my tattoos to look like right now, and a lot more about what I want them to say 10 years from now. Not a literal sense, it's a structural sense. I'm chasing flow, cohesion, and I'm chasing work that holds up when the trend dies. That's another reason Japanese composition keeps pulling me in. It's future-proof emotionally. It doesn't rely on novelty. It relies on structure, balance, and restraint. And honestly, that's where I want the podcast to live too. This podcast isn't a highlight reel. It's a body of work. Each episode adds another layer. Each conversation informs the next one. You don't need to hear every episode in order, but if you do, you'll notice the shape forming. The ideas start talking to each other. That's intentional. I want Needle Me This to feel like a sleeve, not a sticker collection. If you're listening to this and you don't have any tattoos, this still applies, because this isn't really about tattoos. It's about how people mark change. It's about how we try to anchor ourselves when life's moving faster than we are. Some people use tattoos, some people use art, and other people use discipline, routine, or structure. The medium doesn't matter, the intention does. That's why I'm excited for Nick Bones' episode. Not because of hype, not because of reputation, but because conversations with people who respect the past while still moving forward tend to cut through the noise. If this episode is about asking better questions, the next one is about listening to someone who's lived the answers longer than most of us. One thing I've noticed across every episode so far, and this didn't hit me right away, is that nobody comes back just because their tattoo turned out good. Good tattoos are the baseline. That's the expectation. What brings people back is how they felt while something permanent was happening. Every client so far, Dante, Caitlin, Austin, Teresa, Brittany, they're all about different things, but the pattern beneath is the same. Control during chaos. Being seen without having to explain yourself. Sitting still long enough to actually process something instead of avoiding it. Tattooing creates a container for that. It's not a spiritual fluff, it's structure. Pain gets talked about in tattooing like it's a badge of honor, or it's like something to be powered through, but the pain is actually a filter. When something hurts enough, the performative layers fall off. People stop editing themselves. You don't have to be the bandwidth to pretend. That's why the conversations sound different in the chair than they do anywhere else. You don't get that honesty in a podcast studio. You get it when somebody can't distract themselves any further. You haven't really heard it too much because I cut out the pauses, but there's a lot of silence that happens during these conversations. There are moments in these sessions that never make it into clips. Long silences, heavy breathing, someone staring at the wall for 10 minutes straight. Those moments matter just as much as the talking. Silence is usually where people realize something they weren't expecting to. The talking is just how they try to make sense of it afterward. A tattoo doesn't just mark a moment. It anchors a decision. Even when people say, I don't really know why I got this, they do. They just don't have language for it yet. Every piece is a line in the sand that says, I was here, I chose this, I didn't avoid it. And that's why regret gets misunderstood. Most people don't regret the tattoo. They regret who they made it with or who they were trying to escape. One of the hardest things for people, especially high-functioning people, is letting someone else take control without it feeling like weakness. Tattooing forces that. You can't micromanage pain. You can't rush the healing. You either trust the process or you fight it the whole way. And the people who fight it the most usually learn the most from it. Talking on regret and meaning, people ask all the time if a people has to mean something forever. No, it has to mean something honestly at the time. Meaning evolving isn't failure. It's a proof that you didn't freeze yourself in place. Some tattoos age like scars. Some age like reminders. Some age like chapters you don't reread but still need to write. All of those are valid. Your story is valid. Upholding your worth in your art is one of the most important things that you can do. Another quiet theme across these episodes is identity. Not the Instagram version, the private one. Motherhood changes it. Burnout changes it. Loss changes it. Growth changes it. Tattoos don't give people identity. They give people a way to claim the one that they're already becoming. There are a lot of tattoo podcasts about artists. That's fine. The space is covered. This podcast exists for the people in the chair because tattooing isn't a performance art. It's a relational one. And the person being tattooed is doing just as much internal work as the person holding the machine. So if there's a core question underneath this whole podcast, it's this. What do people need in moments of transition? So far, the answer keeps coming back to the same way. They need space. They need structure. They need permission to change without being judged for who they used to be. That's what Needle Me This is built on. Not hype, not aesthetics, just honest moments happening in real time with permanent consequences and the clarity that comes after. If you've listened this far, you already know this podcast isn't really about tattoos. It's about what people do when they hit a moment where something has to change and they decide not to run from it. Every episode so far has been proof of that. Different lives, different stories, same underlying need. Space to sit with who you are and permission to become who you're turning into. That's why we'll keep building here. I appreciate anybody who's joining me along for the journey. As always, fresh ink, fresh clarity, mild trauma. See you next episode.